Welcome back to another episode of Projecting Grandeur. I'm your host, Ron Dichter. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all of you that have liked and commented and shared it. Much appreciated. Jumping in, I want to talk about startup life today. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably have never done a startup. So if you're about to embark upon it, or if you've already embarked upon it and you just need some misery loves company kind of feel good, hopefully today's your day. So I have started, I think five, actually it might be six companies now. And every time I start a company, with the exception of the first time, I always seem to forget just how hard things can be. And what makes startup life so hard, outside of the obvious things about being able to make money, is your product, service, whatever you're selling going to be in demand? The hardest part that I find about startup life, and actually I find it even harder now, and I'll explain, is the amount of hats that you wear in a startup. So my last company that I have just left, we had 300 and some odd employees, lots of processes dialed in, lots of procedures dialed in, and, lots of specialists and far less generalists. And what I mean by that is that I had a lot of people in the company that could focus on one or two very specific things and become very good at it. And, the smaller the company, the more spread out your skill set has to be, which inevitably means you have a lot of generalists, people who do a lot of different things, but they don't necessarily go deep on a lot of things. They're surface level, maybe slightly below surface level. And, the challenging part of a startup, and especially in the very early days, it might just be you. Or maybe it's you plus one or two, but there's not a lot of people. And if you think about any business, the same number of things is going to exist whether you're a startup or whether you're a $100 million company. You still have a product or service. You still have to deliver the product or service. You still need to market. You still need to sell. You still have to do payroll and taxes and all of the usual business things. And, you just have less people to do them, which means that oftentimes you have one person that's doing payroll, also the HR manager, also probably the nightly janitor, also probably, dabbling into support and maybe even a little bit of sales. And so what's crazy about, startup life is that you are wearing a tremendous amount of hats, and it requires you to have a wide understanding of the business and an even wider understanding of the nuances of how to handle those things within the business. And it's very hard. And so when you think about starting a business, oftentimes you think about, okay, I've got to sell my product, I've got to support my product, but you never think about all the other things that go along with that concept of starting a business. And so I personally find startup life to be incredibly challenging in that regard, in the amount of hats that you have to wear. And, if you've never done a startup, you're kind of going into that knowing that, or hopefully knowing that. But from my seat where, I just left a company where I was obviously, one of the owners and one of the, obviously the executive team members, we had an army of people to do all these jobs. And so it's been years since I had to go figure out how to do payroll. It's been, frankly, decades since I've had to figure out how to file tax reports, or even something as simple as building a website. Where's my webmaster? It doesn't exist in a startup. And obviously you can have a startup that has, deep funding where you can hire some of these roles. But, if you're going to go bootstrap and you're going to really try to be scrappy, you're going to find yourself doing a lot of these roles yourself. And so I really focus in when I'm doing, because again, I'm in startup mode now, and by choice, I am in startup mode, and by choice, I am wearing all these hats as opposed to, spending what valuable resources I have on roles that I don't really have a full-time position for them. So my recommendation, when you're in this world is, number one, figure out what's the most important thing. And 9 times out of 10 in a startup, it's going to be getting a customer. And then the second thing is being able to deliver the product or service to said customer. So most of your time of your brain, as the founder, should be spent on those things. And when you can, if you find yourself all of a sudden getting bogged down in, administrative nightmares or support nightmares or things that, you might be able to hire and train somebody fairly easily, I would make that one of your first hires. Get all of the little non-revenue generating but essential parts of the business off of your plate so that all or almost all of your time can be spent focused on driving new customers and onboarding new customers to generate and unlock revenue. And anything else, really try to figure out how soon you can hire somebody to take on those responsibilities. So that's my first recommendation. My second recommendation is understand what the difference between a must-have and a nice-to-have is. So a nice new website, you got to have a website. Does it have to be perfect? Probably not. A product that is reliable, well, that's a must-have, right? And so thinking about your business, and again, every business is different based upon what you sell, service or support, but really focusing on what must my business have in order for me to be in existence today. And that is, again, going back to this constraint resources mentality, that is where all of your disposable resources should be spent, is in the I must have these for me to exist bucket. And anything that's a nice to have, that's future things that you would add later on. The third piece of this is understanding, when fires happen, because they do all the time and often, which ones have the risk of burning the entire building down versus which ones are self-contained and, while frustrating, don't necessarily have systemic risks to the entire business. Because if you look at a fire, and let's just say you have 3 fires burning in the business all at one time, and of those fires, 2 of them are contained to this one thing that, might cost you a customer or might cost you, a small issue, but you have this other fire that looks the exact same today, but if not contained, has the risk of burning the entire business to the ground. Well, that's the fire you need to go fight. And not all fires are equal, even though they may look the same today. Which ones have systemic risks is where I would focus my time. So as you're going into startup life, know what you're getting into. You will wear lots of hats. You will have lots of things competing for your time, lots of things competing for your dollars, but you need to understand where to focus them, why you're focusing them there, and then at what point in time can you bring on resources to help you spend more time doing the things that generate and keep revenue, and less time spent on the details or the minutia. All important, but certainly not going to help drive the business forward. So that is my advice for you today. For those of you in startup life, I commiserate with you right now because I know what that feels like. If you're a journeyman or journeywoman entrepreneur and you've done this time and time again, and you're like me, you're just a glutton for punishment and you like to continue doing startups, I get it. There's no energy like it. So keep building, keep pushing forward, and good luck to y'all. Take care.